Anyone who is taking political science? Optional, political science optional. Okay, so if you are having this political science optional, C. Rajmohan. He writes articles in Indian Express. Any article written by this person will be extremely important for your PSR optional. Right. So today's article is about a framework where you are going to see international relations, especially in the context of Donald Trump. The central problem of this article, the central problem that this article tries to project is if we should be depending on an individual to deal with our diplomatic issues, or should we rely on institutions but not individuals. Okay, should we rely on individuals or institutions? Individual versus institutions. Why are we even having this debate? What is the logic? Can you tell me? We have discussed that in a democracy, individuals are not important, but institutions are important. But having said that, why are we recruiting candidates in bureaucracy, or why are we electing candidates? Why are we giving importance to the quality of the candidates? Because institutions should not be static. They should evolve over a period of time. Was the class not announced? Did you not get a message today? And why is no idea? Okay. Okay. So, yeah, going back to that logic, democracy. Tell me, we've already discussed this in the previous classes. Why should we focus on the quality of the individuals when institutions are more important? Okay, let's come back and understand it from an argument. When something is supposed to be process driven, institutional strength is important or individuals? Who is more important? Institution? Let's say there is a process setup. Every day at 7 o'clock you are supposed to read newspaper. Whether I am delivering that content or someone else is delivering that content, the process is everything. Right? If that is the case, then why are we focusing on individuals? The quality of individuals. Let's say, why should the candidate who is supposed to be in bureaucracy have empathy, emotional intelligence, attitude, aptitude, whatever points that you have in ethics syllabus? Why are they important? Exactly. An individual should be capable enough to run an institution. If that is the case for a small institution, we are talking not just about one country but global level diplomacy. The context of this article is to figure out how India should not be dictated, because in an individual, again going back to that first concept, social contract, we need our sovereignty to be protected. Today we have a situation where, since our global ties or our relations with other countries are contingent or dependent on certain parameter, let's say in the case of US, we are economically connected to US in a very strong way. So that is causing some problem, and that is why the President of United States is in a position to dictate the terms sometimes. if not completely. So the art of negotiation should move beyond individuals and focus on methods where, even if we have a situation where the President of the United States is trying to dictate the terms, we should be in a position to bypass that. Otherwise, we will lose our economic sovereignty, or in any way, sovereignty. The concept of sovereignty, where we are supposed to take independent decisions, is affected to a certain extent. The context of this article, therefore, is to figure out a framework on how we conduct our diplomatic relations. Clear? So use this not as a content piece, but as a framework of thought on how to establish these diplomatic channels through multiple means. Okay? So take a look at this. India-US bilateral relations have evolved beyond personality-driven diplomacy. They now rest on institutional frameworks and mutual interests. Okay? That was the scene till Donald Trump came into the picture. He wanted to have his own style or his own way of dealing with things, which kind of broke down those diplomatic channels, and it is becoming difficult for the world to navigate this economic tariff driven diplomatic policy. So there are leadership changes, there are some strategic imperatives which India should continue to drive. What do you mean by this strategic imperative? For example, India and US, if you take a look at the economic integration, largest trade partner of India is still US. We are dependent on a lot of technologies on US. So, for example, GPS, we are still using GPS. Lot of services which are based on Google Maps, where Google Maps itself is based on GPS. Consider your Uber, Ola, Rapido, or Swiggy, anything that has got to do with maps. All the startups are dependent on the technology provided by US in some way or the other. So we cannot afford at this point of time to have a diplomatic blackout. So it is a strategic imperative. Okay? How do we continue to strengthen that, or at least diversify our dependency? This is the focus of the article today. In general, when you are talking about diplomatic engagement, you need to know, these are the keywords. What are the drivers? Meaning, what will shape our diplomatic arrangements? If you categorize them into three different categories, you have institutional forces, economic interests, and strategic necessities. Please use these keywords, language in your answers. Institutional forces, economic interests, and strategic necessities. What do you mean by institutional forces? State departments and defense agencies maintain continuity despite leadership changes. How does it happen? See, today we have Trump. Or on this side we have our Prime Minister Modi ji. Engagement is not about these two individuals. It's between Ministry of External Affairs here and the corresponding Department of External Affairs there in the US. Whoever heads that department will have an established protocol on what to do and what not to do. Okay, that is the first diplomatic channel that we need to strengthen. They are the advisors for the respective leaders, whoever comes. And we need to focus on that. We need to ensure that this diplomatic engagement channels and the protocols are institutionalized, documented in such a way that no matter who is coming to that leadership position, it gets disturbed. That is the institutional force on which we have to focus. Not just with US, any country. And then this is called track 1 diplomacy, this is track 2 diplomacy. And there is something called para-diplomatic channels. What do you mean by these para-diplomatic channels? They are the non-state actors. Let's say, for example, there is a global summit of researchers on any topic. Scientists from India and scientists from US come together on a platform. When such an important event is happening, it is like they're representing our country. Our governments should be in touch with the scientists who are visiting that forum and clearly establish guidelines on how to conduct themselves when they're representing this country. Especially if this is about scientists, let's say scientists from CSIR, a government research organization, or any DRDO. Research organizations like this, if they're participating in a global summit to share their collective wisdom, they need to conduct themselves in accordance to the diplomatic institutions and the protocols they establish there. It's not just about government channels. Our government should probably try to move beyond government individuals alone and even try to establish a methodology of communication for private individuals also. Businessmen, for example, poets. Having said that, there needs to be a clear demarcation on a personal freedom of speech and a collective narrative. So for this collective narrative, we need to have a media framework. We need to engage with international media for the same reason. That is why we have spokespersons. Instead of 100 people telling 100 different things and confusing the world as to what India's stance is, we need to have a established mechanism through spokesperson. This is what we mean by institutional framework. Clear? Anything that is said by a person on such international forum should be treated like a personal opinion only, but not as a stance of our country. Just because they are representing our country doesn't mean they are communicating only our country's stance. Any comments made will be in their official capacity or personal capacity. We need to focus only on the official capacity. And if they are not engaged with the government, it is by default taken as a personal commitment. Clear? That is the institutional forces dimension. Next up, economic interests. Here we have to understand a process called globalization. Globalization. What do you mean by globalization? Are your society classes done? No? What is globalization? Connecting with other countries. Why? Why should we connect? What is your justification for having the desire to connect with other countries? Why? Why connect? What is the logic? So your answer is competition. First dimension is competition. What else? Why should we connect with other countries? Okay, for imports it is good. For exports, how? When you say development, how will we develop? How will globalization lead to development? So, exchange of ideas. What else? Resource distribution. What do you mean by resource distribution? Why are we bothered about distributing our resources to the world? Correct. That is the trade dimension. Any other ideas? Culture, cultural exchange. Why should we have cultural exchange? What is the benefit for our country if we have cultural exchange? Let's say you take an idea like yoga to the world. What is the benefit for India? Soft power diplomacy. It's called soft power. Power is of two kinds: hard power, soft power. Globalization is a agent of soft power. What is globalization now? If you have to sum up, globalization is a process. Whenever there is a word which ends with Asian, please remember it is a process, usually in the context of sociology. This globalization, because it is a process which involves multiple countries or all the countries across the world, it will have an impact on hard power as well as soft power. Hard power means military might. Soft power means culture, economic, strategic ties. Mostly it is used in the context of culture only. Influence of cinema, influence of food, cuisine. It's almost an internet joke that the national food of UK is butter chicken. That is soft power. Alright. Diplomatic engagement should strengthen all these channels. The understanding of economic interests will strengthen globalization as a process because it will ensure flow of trade as well as ideas. That is the second dimension of any international relations engagement. Now coming to the third part is the strategic necessities. What are the geopolitical realities? Today we are in a world where all the countries are moving away from this process of globalization because they have to produce enough number of domestic jobs. For example, look at the narrative in the US. America first. Let's make America great again. Maga. That is a slogan. Why is it happening? There is a rise. If you take a look at this term, there is a rise of right-wing nationalism across the world. What is nationalism? What is the difference between nationalism and patriotism? Great. Is nationalism good? See, that's the right way to look at it. See, if you take a look at this as a spectrum, okay? If this is the spectrum of, this is neutral point. This is the spectrum of nationalism. If you don't have nationalism and if you are too self-critical, you will lose confidence on your country. It is like too much of self-criticism wherein you don't have an identity for yourself, which in every practical sense will affect our sovereignty. Okay? Have too much of nationalism, you almost transform that idea into a concept called jingoism. An example is Hitler's Nazis. We don't want to become any of that. On 15th August 2022, the Prime Minister of this country vowed that we should focus on Panchapran. 5 important things that we have to remember as a nation. One of them is getting rid of colonial mentality and looking at India as an inferior culture. Because if you personally ask me, the biggest problem of this country is lack of self-confidence. More than anything that we can do, we can't speak English, for example. If we can't speak English, we are automatically considered to be inferior. It's just a language. Just because it is paying you money doesn't mean anything else won't. When India has a population of 160 crores, we can dictate the world markets to a certain extent. But we should reduce our dependency, and therefore we have the concept of Atmanirbharta. Okay? So, if we want to understand our strategic necessities, Atmanirbharta in every sense, in defense, in energy, in manufacturing, in jobs, in technology, in economy, all of this is a strategic necessity. So whenever we are conducting our international relations, you have to be extremely clear that we are now focusing on strategic autonomy. Keyword, write it down. What do you mean by strategic autonomy? We are focusing, what is autonomy? Taking decisions on our own terms. Why are we doing this? For safeguarding our sovereignty. Why is it called strategic? Let's say, sometimes you are expected to choose on the basis of morality. For a very long time, India has done that. But there is a shift in foreign policy where we are moving away from universal morality to strategic autonomy. This in the international parlance or in political theory is called realpolitik or realism. Realism. Okay? Realism here means focusing on India's needs first. Bharata first. Everything else comes later. We can't pour from an empty cup. We have to ensure that our needs are fulfilled first. Take care of the nation, then we can become Vishwaguru. That is the idea behind this whole realism. That is the concept of strategic necessities. Now, in the context of sovereignty, one more threat is regional security. Global terrorism. India is an advocate of coming up with a global level treaty on how to deal with terrorists. What will happen if we do this? There is an established mechanism, there is a proven protocol, funds, everything will be there for exchange of information and prevent any terrorist attacks across the world. Clear? Today, if something happens and the diplomatic ties between two countries are broken down, it effectively breaks down any exchange of information between those two countries, and it cannot be dependent on the whims and fancies of one person. It's such a important mechanism to be disturbed by the persona of an individual. Let's say Donald Trump decides that we will break down ties with India. It's not wise. So many lives will be impacted because one person decided to conduct foreign policy like he wishes to. He can negotiate for his country. He's an elected leader. It's fine. But it doesn't give him the right to dictate foreign policy on 100% of the terms. That is why today you are witnessing a trend where US is use again this word decoupling from US. China is decoupling from US economy. Strategic autonomy, decoupling, para-diplomatic channels. Use keywords like this in your international relations answer. What do you mean by decoupling? They are moving away. When I make this assertion, you should also give a explanation or at least a proof. Historically, in 2008, there was a global financial crisis. At that point of time, US economy, and therefore, since the world is dependent on US economy, has seen a recession. It is during this time when China was doing extremely good, they bought US dollars. Because dollar was the global currency back then, having reserves of foreign currency in dollars will impact relations between these countries. And for a very long time, it is the Chinese hold on US dollars that safeguarded US economy. Now they are dumping those dollars. They no longer want to control dollar. At one point of time they wanted to, because they had some advantage. They can dictate the prices. Now, in a situation where there is a trade war kind of a scene, where US is now seeing China as its direct competitor. That was not the case before. The impression that we all had on China was that it was just a factory of the world which manufactures cheap copies. That's not the case anymore. They're competing with US. For a case to the point being, yesterday we have talked about BYD cars. They're as good as Tesla. In fact, Tesla, which was the highest selling car in China, is now overtaken many Chinese companies. In fact, Chinese companies are exporting to US, UK, and that's the reason why tariffs were imposed. That is the strategic necessity we need to focus on. Today we have a scene where China, from being the highest reserve foreign currency reserve holder, it started dumping into the global markets, and UK is the highest holder. So the acceptance of dollar as the global currency is reducing. It is in this scenario, if we don't stop our dependency on US, and if we still continue that relation and dollar becomes invaluable and we are so much dependent on US, even dollar to rupee rate will also get deteriorated. Today we are almost at 90 rupees. $1 is 89, 90 rupees. And it will deteriorate further and go even further down. 80 to 90 rupees, whatever is the rate today. And that should not continue. That is the strategic necessity. What is the importance of US? Largest trade partner, already explained. Defense collaborations. Okay. When we say defense collaborations, there are certain technology transfers that are associated with this. Certain agreements are there. Okay. The partnership helps balance China regional influence. And the strategic alignment in Indo-Pacific preserves this stability. There is a strategy by China called string of pearls. Basically, let's say if this is India and this is Sri Lanka, and here is how through a strait, you have Indonesia here. What strait are we talking about? No, in Malaysia, Indonesia region. We are not talking about Christmas. Malacca Strait. What is the importance of Malacca Strait? Shipping, global shipping. If you want to take goods from China to the rest of the world, you have to turn all the way from China through Indonesia, this Lombok Strait, Malacca Strait, and from there they'll reach Africa, Cape of Good Hope, and from there many other routes. So this will become a choke point. If we stop this, China's goods won't reach the world, which is a danger for them. Therefore, they started what is that initiative? Belt and Road Initiative. Previously it was called One Road, One. Any idea? Okay. They amended okay, take this as a homework. What is this Belt and Road Initiative? Why did they amend their own constitution, Chinese constitution? What is the previous name of this? When did this start? It's almost a decade. As a part of this, they started investing in different countries and create infrastructure. They're sort of creating a dependency. And in the Indian Ocean region, they're establishing bases. It's like they want different regions in their control, which is a threat for Indian scenario. US can be partnered for countering this. That is what we are talking about. And since today we have America as a part of major global institutions, we can have bargaining power also. We have talked about how the leadership volatility will create a challenge, because if leadership changes, that will create a problem. Because if you don't have an established mechanism, it will create policy uncertainty. And the transactional approach, that is the present way of dealing with US, that's not going to sustain for a long time. What if another leader comes and changes the whole uh, uh, framework of conversation, and we will have to change that again? It will create a lot of instability. Let's say, a small example I'll give. You are a student who is visiting the country US as a student for doing your masters. At that point of time, there is one established policy. You got adjusted to that. You went to the US in the second year, or towards the end of the second year of Donald Trump. 2 years later, he lost the election. Just a hypothetical scenario. And the policy completely shifted. Now you have made one arrangement for the present situation. There is no policy continuity. Let's say the next president is even worse, and they'll say, we'll stop immigration. It may not sustain, but the person who went on a loan, do you think they will have the capacity to sustain for another 2-3 years for that change to get stabilized? No. Lot of lives will be impacted in this small gap. A COVID lockdown for a few days itself disrupted global economy for at least 3 years. That can be the impact. Imagine 2-3 years itself. Okay? So this is the thought process you need to have. And the last thing is domestic focus. Isolationist tendencies may reduce global engagement. America first policies can marginalize international commitments. America first means you are not really concerned about what will happen in global institutions. Historically, US involved itself in a lot of diplomatic channels, global institutions. A case to the point being World Health Organization. The last time Donald Trump was the president, the COVID issue happened. He unilaterally declared that we will stop funding for World Health Organization because it failed to give information about what was happening in China. That cannot be a solution. Okay? It's like bullying. When you have had an historical advantage of leading an institution and you gained asymmetrically from it, there were situations where global pharma companies based out of US, because they were lobbying for their interest, there were accusations that World Health Organization's policies also changed according to that. Today, because of one issue, you're cutting it down and making it purely transactional. That will disturb global institutions also. They want to walk out of Paris Climate Deal. They want to walk out of World Trade Organization. Effectively, WTO is not functioning anymore, if we are honest. How else can you explain all these tariffs? Today they are in a position of leverage. Tomorrow another country, let's say China, will overtake them, or maybe India will overtake them. It should never be like we get to dictate terms. An individual country can never dictate terms for the entire globe, which is unfair, which is not justice. Therefore, India always advocates a rules-based world order, another keyword which should be there in your answer. Okay. Now take a look at this. How did India-US relations evolve? In the Cold War era, US was away from India because we had a USSR inclination. What is Cold War? It's an ideological war whether the world should move towards capitalism or socialism. Capitalism headed by US, socialism headed by USSR. And it had its impact on international relations. It was about the methodology we want to adopt for power. Honestly speaking, we were a part of something called non-aligned movement. We didn't want to associate with either US or USSR. Having said that, we still depended on USSR for our technology needs because US didn't support India. There was a case where we had something called the PL 480 program where we were depending on US for our food grains. At that point of time, there was a war going on. So, US literally bullied India that if you want food grains as a part of this PL 480 program, you should support US on a international forum, which will again be against the non-aligned stance we have. That was not the case with USSR. That's why whenever you, in today's answers, if you are writing India, Russia, there is a term that we use, all-weather friend. All-weather friend. If you want to describe India and Russia relations, this is the keyword you can use, all-weather friend. So, that was the situation with India and US. After the Kargil war, we saw that there is a convergence because Kargil war was because of the state sponsored trigger from Pakistan side. Similarly, US also saw 9/11. They realized that Pakistan-Afghanistan axis is a hotbed for terror camps. So we needed to engage more with India for their own national security. So we saw some convergence there. And in 2008, from 2005 till 2008, there was a negotiation on nuclear raw materials being supplied to India. India did not sign any nuclear deals, as in they did not agree to stop testing of any nuclear weapons. Therefore, US was not feeling comfortable to supply raw materials to India. Despite that, the negotiation went on and we have closed that nuclear deal in 2008, which is a sign that India and US ties are getting strengthened. Despite we not signing a global treaty that we will never carry out weapon testing, we still want to test our nuclear weapons because our stance is no first use policy and deterrence. What is this nuclear deal? We want to build nuclear reactors for our power. We have to procure raw materials, and to procure raw materials there was a link to that treaty. India's stance was, if we don't have nuclear weapons, our enemies will have, and that will create a problem for us. And they linked it back to the strategic ties that we have held to contain terrorism. And therefore the deal went further. We negotiated. All of this was because of the strength of institutions. It is not because of an individual. So what should be the approach we need to take? we should not focus on executive branch alone. Leaders cannot dictate. US Congress, which is like their parliament, you have to engage with them. Civil society and state governments, because USA is a federation. It's important that we establish link with the federal governments also. Federal government as well as state government. Economic diplomacy, business lobbying. Lobbying is legal in US. You know what is lobbying? Lobbying means, let's say Donald Trump, he owns a business. He can, if he was not a presidential candidate, next time he can come out and openly on behalf of his companies support someone. Just a hypothetical example. Maybe the rules therein might not allow, but let's take some other example. Tesla, Elon Musk. He came forward and supported Trump openly because it can probably help his business interest also. And declaring it to the world and the citizens therein is legal because capitalism is the norm there. So we have to deploy business lobbying to influence their decisions, the diplomatic relations therein. Market access. See, India has huge market potential for consumption. India is one of the youngest nations in the world today, where the average is around 28. So the next generation, especially the so-called Gen Z, you guys, you can spend a lot when compared to the previous generations. You don't think twice to spend on luxury. So this makes India the largest consumption market, and we have to leverage that. And you need to diversify. We have to stop depending on US being the largest partner, open ties with different countries, strengthen EU, Japan, ASEAN ties. That's why, okay, is UK a part of EU? Yes or no? No. There is a concept called Brexit. What is this? Any idea? Read this today. Read Brexit. Okay? In short, Brexit means there is a union called Economic Union. From that, Great Britain came out. UK came out. So, today we have a free trade agreement with UK. For example, a Range Rover car, when it was imported into India, if it costed some 10 rupees and you are imposing 100% duty on that, it became 20 rupees. Just an example. So today we are going to have a Range Rover car, because it is coming from UK, at its original price. So it gives market access to UK. Similarly, we also have to leverage UK market and diversify our partnerships. And there will be some point where USA will still trouble us. Like it is troubling China now. They're waiting. They're okay to take that short-term pain and permanently fix this. India should also take some similar stance and diversify our sources. Okay? This is the approach. So, diversify your dependencies, institutionalize the ties, bipartisan channels, meaning both parties should sit together and have. And most importantly, diaspora. In GS2, we have this Indian diaspora as one element of the syllabus. they become our representatives, our ambassadors for our culture, for our diplomatic ties and everything. And that's how you have to carry out your diplomatic engagement. This framework, when you apply to the present situation, it's a no-brainer that we have to take lessons from whatever is happening with respect to our diplomatic engagement with US and move beyond individual charisma to conduct diplomatic relations. It's good to have a charismatic personality who can deal with volatility like this, but it's not good enough for a future which should not be dependent only on individuals. Okay, this is the funda. Consider this like a basics of international relations class. We are taking multiple topics every day. We have seen governance, internal security, science and technology, basics of fundamental rights. Today we have dealt with international relations as an approach. So once you have articles like this, basics like this, future articles, we can have multiple articles in a single day. Clear? See you tomorrow.